Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Okay, hello. We have Liz Belyea here once again. She was just on our radio version of Lake George Battlefield Moments, talking about all sorts of subjects that are of interest. We have a trivia night coming up on Thursday, November the 14th, 6 p.m. at the Garrison in Lake George. Why don't we start with a sample trivia question, Liz, and then we'll talk more about the Adirondack experience for which you work.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions we'll be asking Thursday night is, what year did New York State establish the Adirondack Park? Is it A, 1764, B, 1930, C, 1892, or D, 1865?
Okay. I've got a trivia question, too.
Okay.
So why don't you ponder this one?
Okay.
Fort Edward's name came into being in 1755. Prior to that, what was the fort and the community known as? Was it A, Fort Clinton, B, Fort Frederick, C, Fort Lyman, or D, Fort Orange?
All right, I will ponder that one.
Okay, well, let our listeners ponder too. Meanwhile, tell me about the Adirondack experience. I know a lot of people have visited when it was the Adirondack Museum, and all sorts of great things happening there in the middle of Blue Mountain Lake, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what's the focus of the Adirondack experience these days?
Yeah, so the Adirondack Experience is the preeminent regional museum dedicated to Adirondack history and culture. Like many Adirondack businesses, we are open seasonally, late May to mid-October. And as you mentioned, we are located in beautiful Blue Mountain Lake, which is about an hour north of Lake George.
How big an area do you draw from? I mean, when I go in the summertime, it's usually fairly crowded. I go on rainy days, to be honest with you. But it doesn't lack for people. What's the region from which you draw?
We truly have visitors from all over the world. We have a lot of locals come and visit us, but we draw from New England and the Mid-Atlantic typically. And it's funny that you should say rainy days, because those are consistently our busiest days.
And so you don't have people like raiding your beach and stuff, or do they come in the rain? They take dives into the lake or anything you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but one really unique thing that we offer at the museum, it's an opportunity to be outdoors, is that during July and August, we have 2 hiking trails that are available to the public. It's 3/4 of a mile long one way, so a 1.5 mile round trip. And the trails lead you down to the 80KX Boathouse, which is absolutely beautiful, situated right on Minnow Pond. And our visitors can borrow a historic guide boat or canoe and take it out for a row or a paddle. So that's something pretty unique that we offer.
Nice. Tell us a little bit more about Liz Belyea. I know you're from Lake George originally, so tell us a little bit about your history and then how you got to work at the Adirondack experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am born and raised in Lake George, and I'm so excited to be back here for Taps and Trivia, and especially hosting it at the Garrison. I grew up right up the road, so it feels very full circle. And I definitely have to attribute my grandfather, Charles Hawley, for taking me to the Adirondack experience when I was a kid and really fostering within me and our entire family a true love and appreciation of the Adirondack region. I left for a little while. I went and got my degree in history at SUNY New Paltz and then went on to earn a master's in museum studies at NYU. And then there was like this little thing called COVID that happened that kind of, turned some people's lives around, and that brought me back to the region. And I was really fortunate to be offered a job at the Adirondack experience, and I accepted in July of 2021, and I have been there ever since.
Now, you mentioned your grandfather, Charles Hawley. I mean, he is truly a legend in these parts and a true Renaissance man. I mean, just to acquaint our listeners to some of the things Charles Hawley did.
Yeah, he was on the Lake George Park Commission. He owned Hawley Advertising. He was a pretty prolific artist later on in life. And he was my favorite person to spend time with. And
we actually have a number of prints of Chuck Hawley's in the Lake George Battlefield Park Visitor Center that people can actually purchase if they like. But we have them on display. Been for years at the Holiday Inn also. So, his legacy lives on. So what's your job entail as public program manager for the Adirondack Experience?
Yeah, it changes quite a bit from summer to winter. So during the summertime, that's when I'm super, super busy, as probably many Adirondackers can relate to. So during that time of the year, I'm running all of our signature events and programs. We offer about 6 signature events at the Adirondack Experience every year. For instance, the annual Rustic Fair is our biggest event of the year. That's always the weekend after Labor Day, and we have artisans from really across the country come in who specialize in rustic furniture, furnishings, and decor. I'm running a lot of events like that. I also oversee our staff that work in our exhibits and on our trails at our boathouse. And so that's a very, very busy time for me. And then winter is, I wouldn't say it's not busy. It's maybe slightly less busy. I hit the road for Taps and Trivia, and I also plan for the next season. So I'm setting all the pieces in place for a successful next season.
So this is the off-season for Adirondack Experience, along with many other businesses in the North Country. So you close around Columbus Day, do you? And reopen when?
We reopen Memorial Day weekend.
Okay.
The Friday of Memorial Day weekend.
And Taps and Trivia, which we're going to enjoy at the Garrison in a few days here. Where else do you take that?
We have really been all over the place. We've partnered with some other local spots like Mean Max and Glens Falls. I've also taken this on the road to Rochester. We've been up to Plattsburgh. Where else? Bloomingdale near Saranac Lake, Tupper Lake. So we go all over the place.
Cool. Great. All right, I've got another trivia question for you.
Okay.
Many, many presidents have visited Lake George Battlefield Park and Fort George. Which of these presidents did not visit? A, John Adams, B, Thomas Jefferson, C, Teddy Roosevelt, D, George Washington. All right, and I asked you a question earlier. You want to go back to that?
Sure.
These questions will not be part of trivia night.
Oh, okay.
But I asked you what Fort Edward's previous name was and gave you the choices of Fort Clinton, Fort Frederick, Fort Lyman, and Fort Orange. Do you have an answer?
I have to admit, I didn't even have to think about it. It's C, Fort Lyman.
Wow.
And I learned that from a summer working at Fort William Henry.
Okay, great. Do you want to try to give the answer for the other question I asked you?
Sure. I'm a little less certain on this one, but I think it might be A, John Adams.
Okay, the choices again were John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and George Washington. And you are correct.
All right.
John Adams never made it to upstate New York. He was not an active part of the military, obviously. He was more of a paper shuffler and doing important things for the Revolution, but not on the front lines. So thank you. What other things might we expect in the future from the Adirondack Experience in terms of exhibits and attractions? Anything in the planning board right now?
We have a couple projects that are in the works, but just last season we opened our newest permanent exhibit, Artist and Inspiration in the Wild. I have to say I'm just absolutely in love with this exhibit. And one of the things that's really exciting about it is that it is a permanent exhibit in the sense that it's always going to be at the Adirondack Experience, but we change out what's on display each season. So our curatorial team is hard at work selecting new pieces that are going to go on display for 2025. So there's always going to be something new, and it really gives us an opportunity to display our remarkable art collection.
You really do, and you have it's not a history museum per se, but you have so many historical artifacts, exhibits, etc. And I have to say publicly that the Adirondack Experience gifted the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance Visitor Center last year with a fantastic diorama of General Abercrombie leaving, with 17,000 men from the head of Lake George to attack Fort Carillon, later Fort Ticonderoga, unsuccessfully. But it beautifully depicts, and for those of us of a certain age who are used to dioramas, that we don't see them as frequently anymore, it harkens back not only to the time when we were kids, but also to just a truer sense, a multi-dimensional look as opposed to something you see on a computer screen. So we're very thankful to the Adirondack Experience for that, as well as for this partnership. You want to try me another trivia question yourself?
Absolutely. Do you want to go over the answers from the other two?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So on our radio spot, I had asked, from 1810 to 1962, the town of Lake George was known by a different name. Was it A, Queensbury, B, Caldwell, C, Bolton Landing, or D, Fort George?
Well, I was a big basketball fan and player growing up, and one of my favorite players was a guy named Jumpin' Joe Caldwell. The town was not named for Jumpin' Joe, but my answer would be Caldwell B.
That is correct.
There is a crowd here in the studio, so they're kind of like helping me with the answers.
I also asked earlier on this podcast, what year did New York State establish the Adirondack Park? Was it A, 1764, B, 1930, C, 1892, or D, 1865?
I would go with 1892.
That is correct. It was C,
Okay.
1892. I do have one more if you're up for one more.
Well, let's see if anyone in the gallery, they can signal by hands. They're not on the mic, but let's give the folks in the gallery here a chance to answer. What do you got?
All right. What is the name of the monster that allegedly swims in the depths of Lake George? Is it A, Nessie, B, Montcalm, C, Charlie, or D, Georgie?
It's D, Georgie.
Do we have consensus? Everyone agree with the selection of Georgie?
Agreed.
Okay. How'd they do?
They did very well. It is D, Georgie. And so these questions will be asked at our trivia night. So if you are a listener to this podcast, you're coming in with a little bit of an edge.
Whew, way to go. Okay, so once more, the trivia night, Taps and Trivia, will be on Thursday, November the 14th, starting at 6.
Yep.
We recommend you come a little bit early to get some food and kind of hang out, get the vibe at the Garrison Pub on Beach Road at Lake George. And it will be a fun time for everybody. A good way to kind of bring in the beginnings of the Thanksgiving season and talk history and talk Adirondacks. What could be better?
Yep.
Liz, thank you so much for coming along, and thank you so much for sponsoring this event with us next week.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to it. And thanks again for having me.
For more information, you can always come to the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance website, lakegeorgebattlefield.org, and welcome to go to our YouTube channel. Not only listen to this podcast, but see past podcasts and other public events we've held. Thank you.
Great, thanks. You can find out more information about upcoming events, programs, and exhibits at the Adirondack Experience at theadkx.org.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to info@lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in every Saturday morning for Lake George Battlefield Moments.